Yeah, a full enough picture of the events in the meetings. There were 4 safety advisory group meetings: the 7th of October, the 16th of October, the 24th of October, and the 3rd of November. We provided minutes for each of those, and we have provided you with the full minutes in both unredacted and redacted form. In terms of the quality of the minutes, they are circulated after the meetings. The meetings from the 7th of October were actually circulated on the same day to the attendees of the meeting. There was a little bit of a delay after the 16th, but they were subsequently circulated. We've tried to provide the best minutes for these meetings that we can. We're actually audited by the Sports Ground Safety Authority on the way that we administer the SAG, and they have previously recognised the quality of the way in which we manage these processes. But if the minutes are not adequate for these purposes, then all I can do is apologise.
Could you send us we understand that they are filmed, and it'd be helpful for us to have a better picture if you could send us the films.
We could certainly undertake to provide that to the committee.
Okay, thank you. So we can have a context of who you are, what your responsibilities are. Could you set out the legal position of your council's responsibilities in relation to the attendance or non-attendance of away fans and how their safety is managed?
If I may just say something by way of opening, and then I'll hand over to Tony and to Richard to pick up some of those details. Obviously, I did also share a written statement with members of the committee prior to this session, just to set out the context of the role of the Safety Advisory Group, my specific role as the leader of the council, and of course the timeline of events as I understand them. I also just want to make it clear I'm not a member of the Safety Advisory Group myself. I had no role to play in the deliberations of that group. That is a separate operational role. I've also been clear that I respect the operational independence of the advisory group and indeed of West Midlands Police. I wish the Safety Advisory Group had been able to take a different position to the one that it took. I've made that publicly clear, and I note the Chief Constable referred to that in terms of the interaction I had with him in the run-up to these events. I am absolutely clear that I want Birmingham to be a place where people can come and attend football matches freely without fear of harassment or discrimination. That absolutely remains my view, and I'm absolutely clear that we have to have a robust, independent safety advisory group process. I also am clear that whilst I'm the political leader of the council and took a very clear line on the fact that I thought this was not the position I wish to see, it is not my role as the leader of the council. It would be inappropriate for me to interfere in an operational matter and on a process that is led by the evidence that statutory partners, including the police, place before it. But I will ask Tony just set out some of the understanding of the legal position as well with regard to the SAG.
Yeah, in relation to the SAG, obviously they were a recommendation from the Taylor report following Hillsborough and other tragedies. The actual purpose of the SAG is in relation to providing specialist advice to the authority in terms of ground safety, and that obviously includes fans' attendance at the ground. So they provide specialist advice, which is why you have the specialist agencies such as the police, the fire service, all that contributing to the SAG to formulate the advice. The advice is then given to the, which it was in this case, to the event organiser. In this case it was Aston Villa Football Club. My understanding is that if there's a disagreement about the advice that's being given, it is then for the council, and that falls within Richard's sphere, to actually see whether or not there needs to be action taken in relation to the safety certificate encompassing that ground, in this case Aston Villa. So that's how any prohibition or restriction would be imposed upon the safety certificate in relation to fans' attendance, for example.
And should the SAG take responsibility or take account of any reputational risk to the UK, not just Birmingham, of any decision of banning fans from another nation to an environment of such, where, in particular in an environment where there's such an international tension?
I think the SAG's primary role is about safety at sports grounds, which is why there was a recommendation to actually bring those in. They're obviously chaired by the local authority, which was a recommendation within the Taylor report. So I think the predominant focus of the SAG must be a dissemination of information between the people who deal with risks such as public safety, in other words the police who've given evidence earlier today, So I think the primary focus must be dissemination of information for members of the SAG to formulate the best advice possible based on all the evidence, with the focus being on safety.
So, obviously you're taking account of the threat perspective, and what you've circulated in the public domain is a redacted account of what you thought the threat perspective is, and I want to question why you've redacted that when it says the threat to the Jewish community is medium, Muslim community low, Christian community low, black community low, Villa community low, Maccabi high, pro-Palestinian medium threat on a higher scale in terms of fixtures this year. Why was that redacted? What reputational damage would it have done to the authority by redacting that?
I can't speak about the specific redaction. We have specialist advisors who advise on issues of freedom of information requests, which deal with in terms of the legislation and also the exemptions that were permitted to apply. That was looked at in terms of the information in conjunction with the people responsible for holding that information. We also take representations from the people who provided the information to the authorities, such as partnering agencies, such as the police, and then a decision will be made in relation to disclosure of that information. I can't specifically comment on that, but I will have a look at that and provide information to the committee if that is required.
Can I jump in there? Can I push you on that point? Because the threat levels weren't redacted from the third SAG. Does that strike you as curious? They're redacted from the first SAG and not the second and third SAG minutes?
Again, I'd have to go back and actually look at the
But
basis
what's
of
your professional
redaction.
view? Does it not seem strange that threat levels are redacted in the first minutes, but not the third minutes?
I suppose what I would say, I don't know the specific reason for the redactions, but you'd obviously expect some consistency. So if that happened, yes, I would be surprised.
So I know, Mr. Cotton, Councillor Cotton, you've concerned about the reputational damage it's done to your city, and I'm sure you're concerned about the risk it now faces for people in the Jewish community and potential people who come to, Birmingham University's got the highest JSOC in the country. What threat does this pose to them now that this decision has been taken?
Well, you're absolutely correct that the reason why I made the statement I did in my response to the Chief Constable when he advised me that would be the proposal they were putting to the Safety Advisory Group. And the reason I made the public statement when these matters went into the public domain was exactly that. I'm very proud Birmingham, born and bred in Birmingham. I've lived my entire life there. I am very proud of the fact it's a diverse city. It's a place where people of all faiths and none, all ethnicities make their home, and I want it to be a welcoming and inclusive place. And anything that detracts from that is a concern for me, which is why I raised those issues. We have a very strong tradition of interfaith working in Birmingham that goes back some 30 years now. We have some very vibrant community engagement that we do with communities in the city, including our Jewish community. We also have a good working relationship with the Community Security Trust. We are currently developing our anti-Semitism strategy for the city, which will draw on the government's national anti-Semitism strategy that's been brought forward as well. I am absolutely clear as the leader of this council that we will do everything that we need to do to ensure that people of this city, from the Jewish community and from all communities, can feel safe and supported.
Jeremy. Can I just come in there? It's relevant. Have you adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism? Has the council?
Yes, we adopted that. I think, you'll need to check the record, but I think it was around 2017, 2018. That was done by means of a vote through full council.
Okay, I'll come back to that later, if that's okay.
So, as a council, clearly there's levels of risk, and you can take the decision that you just don't want no disorder whatsoever, which probably means you never put a football match on again, or you manage the risk. What's your risk appetite here? Because you wanted the away fans to be able to attend. Were you prepared to accept some form of disorder as a result of that?
My view on this was that I did not want a message being sent out about this city not being a welcoming and inclusive place, and I was very concerned that such a decision to ban away fans would absolutely communicate that position to the world, and that's not a message I want conveyed around Birmingham. I think when it comes to the specifics of safety and risk, that is absolutely rightly considered in the forum of a safety advisory group, and you want the professional expertise and perspective to inform that decision. It shouldn't be informed on sort of external political perspective. So my view of that would be it'd be very difficult for a safety advisory group to take a decision having received sort of clear assessment from the police and others around what they perceive the risk to be. And I don't believe that any council leader would be in a position where they would go against very serious advice that was coming forward in that forum. So I think there's an important balance to be struck there.
Was it made clear to you that there were mitigations that could have been put in place, as Lord Mann had recommended?
So I had asked, the timeline of events was that I received a message from the Chief Constable on the 8th of October advising that would be the advice that was given to the Safety Advisory Group. I responded, as has already been alluded to say I thought that was not going to send a positive message about Birmingham. However, I do respect operational independence of these matters. I then, on the 9th of October, asked to meet with officers supporting the Safety Advisory Group so I could assure myself of two things. One was that the processes were being correctly followed in terms of how the Safety Advisory Group operates, and also just to question how are we absolutely clear on the risk assessment that's been brought forward by the police and other partners. And that I think was an appropriate thing for me to do as leader.
You were given the intelligence that was used to make the decision. Were you able to see any other forms of intelligence?
I was given the high-level readout on what was being provided to the Safety Advisory Group. I was very clear that I shouldn't get into the minutiae or detail of the Safety Advisory Group meetings. I think they have to be led by the evidence based on the partners around the table.
Were you aware that the peer review had recommended that the least worst solution would be away fans with reduced allocation?
That was not something I was aware of at that point, but I had asked the reason I was asking questions is because I wanted to ensure that had all options been looked at.
Yeah, of course,
just saying you sought reassurance as part of the process that the procedure had been undertaken appropriately, but were you reassured?
So I continued to ask questions on the back of that meeting, and indeed, as you'll have seen, there was then further correspondence between the council and the police through officer channels, and of course there was a further meeting of the Safety Advisory Group that took place. My principal concern here was that we were taking a decision that did not detract from the reputation of the city, and I fear that the reputation of the city has been affected by the manner this was handled.
Sorry to just ask the question again. Were you reassured that the process had been followed?
I was reassured the process with regard to the operation of the Safety Advisory Group had been absolutely followed. Obviously, I've followed with interest the proceedings this afternoon regarding some of the information that was provided to that Safety Advisory Group, and I'm sure that the committee will draw its conclusions on that in due course.
And what about the interaction between central and local government? Because clearly one of the things that has been the Baroness Casey review put forward, and something we will consider as a committee, is where central government should get involved and whether there was more of a role for central government. Do you have any views on that?
I think certainly when you've got issues of national interest, and this clearly became an issue of national interest, there needs to be interaction between the local authorities and central government, but both need to inform each other over the handling of something it becomes about the UK's reputation as well as the city's reputation. So I'll be very interested to see what comes forward in terms of recommendations to yourself in that regard.
Thank you. Carla.
Thank you. I am very concerned about these redactions. There's only 2 substantive redactions in all the minutes. They're in the first SAG. The first one is with regard to one which has been said, mentioned threat to the local Jewish community. In the third set of minutes, the threat, as I've said, is not redacted, although the reference to the Jewish community is missing. There's also an inaccuracy that the first minutes say the threat to the Muslim community is low. Those are summarised in the third minutes as being medium, so they're inaccurate. The redaction is bizarre because the same thing has been redacted in one and not the other. The other substantive redaction is the one with regard to the police intelligence or lack of. There's in absence of intelligence based on conversations with peers and my professional judgment, there's no concerns with Villa fans, etc., etc. That's been redacted. Can you think of any legal reason why that should be redacted?
The two bases for redaction was one, firstly involving individuals' personal data, which is probably obvious from the redactions. The second redactions was in relation to law enforcement issues after the police and national intelligence. So that's why my understanding is why the redactions were applied.
Basically, a lack of intelligence. It's not simply to avoid political embarrassment.
Not as far as I'm aware. I think it was done on the basis of the exemptions that, were felt to be rightly applicable.
And can you come back to us on both those redactions
Yes.
and the inconsistency?
Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. When you knew the Chief Constable, or when you knew that there was going to be a recommendation to ban the away fans, how strongly did you discuss this with the Chief Constable? How far did it get, this conversation?
So I responded to a text message I received from the Chief Constable on the 8th of October to say that, as I set out earlier, that I thought this was a decision that would reflect badly on the city. I thought it was the wrong decision. However, I also emphasised in that message that I respected the operational independence of the police and of the Safety Advisory Group. That was the message I very clearly conveyed back to the Chief at that point.
And did you go outside the city politically? Did you address this nationally?
No, my view was very straightforward, that it was for the Safety Advisory Group to act on the basis of the intelligence and information that was put before it by statutory partners. I thought it would be inappropriate for me as a politician to step into that space, having already conveyed my concerns around the wider impact that it would have upon the city.
And what about this from the resource perspective? Because there's an issue of resources in addressing these risks. Was there not an element there where you could talk to one's political masters in Whitehall?
Well, again, I would have expected such conversations to be based on information and intelligence that went to the Safety Advisory Group. We have a long-established process that the Safety Advisory Group considers those with the appropriate professionals sat around the table and then would come forward with recommendations and proposals. I thought it would be crossing the line, frankly, from the point of view of my responsibility to step into that space. I thought the process should be followed, and I'm sure the process was in terms of the group itself.
And did you quiz them as the process had been followed, or did you assume it had happened?
No, I asked a series of specific questions. When this process started, I must admit my knowledge of safety advisory groups and the whole process was somewhat limited. It was not something I'd come into contact with, so I had to learn a number of things. Yes, exactly. So and the reason I convened that meeting with officers on the 9th was actually to understand what's the role of the safety advisory group, where does this fit in terms of the legal framework, what is the appropriate process to be followed in these circumstances. I was assured that the appropriate process was being followed from the point of view of the City Council as the convener of the safety advisory group. Clearly that safety advisory group can only act on the basis of the information that's placed in front of it, and that I think is probably the issue that we're teasing out here this afternoon.
Thank you. Jenny Reid.
Thank you. I asked earlier about whether your local authority had adopted the IHRA definition. You said yes, which is nice to hear. But I think you're right. I think that this incident has damaged the reputation of Birmingham as a whole, and it's allowed people to spread myths about Israelis being uniquely evil and unable to come here and behave properly in the UK. But do you think that it is appropriate for councillors who have predetermined views, anti-Semitic views, to sit on the SAG and be part of this decision-making process? And yeah, that's my first question.
I suppose that there are two points that come out of that question. One is the role of elected members and whether they should indeed sit on safety advisory groups. Now, Birmingham's unusual but not unique in that respect, and we'll come back to that because I do have some views on that. The points around any member participating in a safety advisory group meeting, or indeed any other meeting, I would expect them to abide by the code of conduct, and I would expect them to abide by declaring any interests or issue that had arisen that would be seen potentially to prejudice their judgment. And I note that on the agenda for the Safety Advisory Group, there was a point at which people were expected to disclose any prejudicial interest. I think that's absolutely right and proper.
It wasn't in this case, was it?
So my understanding is that the 24th of October, where a decision was taken, there was there were disclosures were made. One member recused themselves from the meeting on that basis.
I know
But,
you're not. I know
yeah.
I'm not going to push this because I appreciate that that's not your that's not your responsibility.
Yeah.
However, what is your responsibility, in my understanding, and I've got a question for you in a minute, is that as your fellow councillors, firstly, if you'd adopted the IHRA, where they're making anti-Semitic statements and generalisations on Twitter and in public meetings, that is a problem. So what action do you think what action should be taken as a result of that? And then secondly, how did these councillors find themselves on this committee, and why was it felt that it was appropriate that someone with these views would be making a decision of this nature?
So I would expect any member who participates in any meeting to declare interest appropriately. I would expect them to abide by the Council Code of Conduct and indeed any commitments that we have collectively made as a council, including respect for the IHRA, which, as I say, we passed in 2017. We have a disciplinary and standards machinery that can deal with breaches of those nature, and I would expect, if there were those issues, that to be pursued through those mechanisms.
Are there any ongoing investigations into the conduct of those councillors on the SAG?
I am not aware of any such at the moment, but obviously the standards process is separate to my role as leader of the council. I think that's right as well.
Who appoints the members of the SAG, councillor members of the SAG?
Councillor members of the SAG are appointed by at full council at the annual general meeting.
It's correct. I mean, formally, the councillor representatives on the SAG used to be appointed by the Licensing and Public Protection Committee, and I think there was a report in April 2019 from the then Assistant Director questioning whether or not councillors should actually be on the SAG at all. What happened as a result of that later in 2019, a decision was taken that councillors who sat on the SAG should be appointed by full council itself. They were appointed on the basis of one representative of three of the main political parties and one ward member for the area covered by the Safety Advisory Committee, I presume with the intention that they could contribute to any local issues that arose within the community. So that's in essence, they are selected through the annual governance process of the council in selecting who sits on what committee.
So did you have any discussions at any point which recognised that there were councillors, some of your councillors, who were campaigning publicly to not just ban away from fans but stop the match in its entirety? Did that at any point come to you as leader of the council?
No, that didn't come to me.
So you didn't see the
as leader.
tweets from your account? No.
No, I wasn't aware of specific tweets. I tried to stay away from Twitter, to be honest with you, these days as much as possible. But no, I was not aware of that position.
Okay. I ask your... Sorry, I missed the very beginning of the meeting. Are you the legal counsel?
No, excuse me, I'm the Executive Director of City Operations, so I'm responsible for the part of the council that administers the SAG, okay, and also the licensing function which regulates the ground.
Legal counsel.
Sorry. So can I ask about predetermination? So for my sins, I used to be a councillor and I chaired a planning committee for a number of years, and predetermination was obviously a really important principle in local government. Is that applicable to the SAG?
SAG in essence is not a decision-making body, it's actually a body that provides advice, but I think any council has a really strongly opposed view where it would impact upon their ability to actually reach a fair decision based on the facts, should actually consider whether or not they should be sitting within a committee. And I probably don't need to tell you this from what you're saying, there's a difference between being predisposed to something as opposed to predetermining something.
I completely agree with you. So in that case, do you think it was appropriate that that councillors who were campaigning publicly to stop the football game in its entirety, that were on the SAG, which made the decision to ban away fans? Is that legally appropriate and morally appropriate?
I think there's a number of things in answering that. I think each individual member of a committee, councillor or otherwise, actually has to take a personal decision as to whether or not they can make an informed decision based on anything without predetermining something. Certainly the terms of reference of the SAGs actually say that there should be there is a question raised about whether or not there is a conflict of interest or issues such as predetermination. On the agenda of the SAG meeting that took place on the 24th of October, there was quite specific advice given in relation to people declaring interest, and as the leader has already said, I understand that one councillor did recuse themselves based upon...
After the decision was made. After the decision was made. Sorry.
Based upon previous social media posts, and it was emphasised on there that, and I think it would be an unfair expectation of the chair of that committee to trawl through every social media post that someone's done. So it's very much a personal obligation on the individual involved.
I do think, I appreciate that you don't want to trawl through people's social media. I mean, who would want to do that? However, in a case like this that has such huge public scrutiny on it, were you not concerned that such councillors were sitting on that had sat on the SAG and that they went to a meeting and then recused themselves rather than you taking the kind of moral and leadership role of removing them from the committee?
I mean, I would expect any member who had a perceived conflict of interest to take that on their own responsibility to remove themselves from such a meeting. If I'd been in that position myself, I would certainly have recused myself from a meeting.
Mr. Brooks.
Could I come in on this?
Yes.
So just in relation to these four meetings, I think it's useful to be clear about the sequence of events and the involvement of the individual councillors. So the 7th of October meeting did not provide advice. It established the planning assumption but did not provide advice. So there were two councillors present at that, and I think we accept that they should have declared interests, but they did not. At the next meeting, the 16th of October, advice was provided, the advice that there should be no away fans, but that advice was provided unanimously by all of the partner members of the Safety Advisory Group. So I think that is significant in relation to the involvement of the two councillors, and there was an opportunity for them to express dissent. The 24th meeting is then when I think we get it right, where we have declarations of interest and recusation.
I think it's clear that very serious error of judgment here, which has really harmed the confidence of the Jewish community in Birmingham, that such people with such predetermined views of the Jewish community and of Israelis were allowed to be involved in that committee meeting. And I'd encourage you to kind of reflect on that and think about it. That's all I've got at the moment.
I've got Peter Prinsley and then I've got Joe.
Thank you. I'm Peter Prinsley. I'm sorry I was a bit delayed. I was trying to get a Holocaust memorial debate agreed. I'm the MP for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket. So I've been listening to this, and I'd like to ask really a question similar to the question I asked the police officers before. So the thing is, the SAG, as everybody has said, can act on the intelligence that it receives. But actually what it's doing, it's acting on its interpretation of the intelligence that it receives. And the question really is what is the risk of this being politically prejudiced? Because that appears to be a belief that is held by many. And so my question is, how could this be realistically refuted? If I were to say to you, My belief is that there was political prejudice on that safety advisory group on your council, and you, first of all, failed to notice it, and secondly, if you had noticed it, you didn't do anything about it. And this resulted in the advice to ban a match. And from what we've been hearing about all of this over more than one session now, is it seems that there was a great deal of confused information which is being fed into the SAG, but there is a suspicion also that there was a predetermination, and some of the information was therefore changed in order to fit with the predetermined decision. That is the belief, I believe, of many of the members of the Birmingham Jewish community, and it is that needs to be addressed.
I mean, from my perspective, and I'll ask Mr. Brooks to pick up on some of the detail around the operation of the Safety Advisory Group in this context. From my perspective, and actually having listened to the earlier discussion here this afternoon, I think the Safety Advisory Group can only operate effectively in an atmosphere of candour and of confidence in the material that's placed before it. And that the judgment then has to be made on the basis of the material that's placed before it. But I think there is clearly some concern around the information that's placed before that group. I don't expect everybody around that safety advisory group to be able to be subject matter experts or indeed try and second guess, particularly around police intelligence. But my overall reflection would be, unless you've got some candour and some confidence in what's placed before you, you then run into some difficulties. But Richard, I'd ask you to pick up perhaps some more operational detail on that.
Well, I can only agree that the Safety Advisory Group relies upon the expert input of its members, in particular of their risk assessments. It does not make a fresh interpretation of the evidence. It's not competent to do so. Just as the SAG would not be, the Safety Advisory Group members would not be competent to investigate the building safety advice or the fire safety advice. In this case, public safety decision relied extremely heavily on the expert evidence provided by the police.
Yeah. Would you agree with me that these are a really poor set of minutes? Firstly, there's no data regarding the information coming from the police. Secondly, the only opinions that are recorded are that of councillors who are opposed to fans coming to Aston Villa and repeating concerns of the community who want it stopped. Quote, the fact that these councillors have already campaigning in a public arena for the match not to have Maccabi fans in attendance, would you say that there's a breach in Nolan principles?
May I start against?
Do you want to pick up on the minutes?
I mean, I firmly believe that the officers who were administering these meetings were trying their very best to apply the Nolan principles, and in particular to act in the public interest and objectively. Now, the minutes are summary minutes of long meetings. These are 2-hour-long meetings with 30 plus participants. And it's very difficult to capture all of the detail of those meetings. But
there's a complete absence of the intelligence provided by the police, so that we as HAS members have been unable to gain a true picture of exactly what was discussed. These minutes are now out in the public arena, so the whole of the country be studying them, and what's being recorded here is not, we understand now, is not a true picture of what was being informed to the meeting. And then you're getting commentary from councillors who do not want Maccabi fans to attend the match. So we're getting a very biased picture from these minutes. Would you agree with me?
I don't think I can agree that it's a biased picture in the minutes. It may be an incomplete picture and not a perfect record of the meeting, but it is our best attempt to provide an accurate summary of what was discussed at the meeting.
In my view, it's not. We're getting an inaccurate picture, an understanding of exactly what was agreed at that meeting.
I think the fundamental point upon which the decision was made, which is the police intelligence, I mean, it's a genuine question. How can that not be included in the minutes? I can't get my head around that.
I don't quite follow when you say the police intelligence.
The police intelligence, which everyone has told us, informed the decision to ban the away fans, how can that not be included in the minutes? Now, it's not redacted, it's not there, and yet we have the kind of anti-Semitic ramblings of a far left councillor.
When you say the intelligence, do you mean the actual intelligence reports? For example,
anything.
So in advance of the 16th, as you've already discussed as a committee, we wrote as a council to West Midlands Police asking them to set out their reasoning for their risk assessment, which I think was a proper thing for us to do. And in advance of the meeting on the 24th, we wrote to them, and this is unusual practice for safety advisory group meetings, that's not normally done. We wrote to all of the partners asking them to set out their evidence in advance of that meeting, and again the police did that.
Why isn't it in the minutes?
Even just noted as intelligence can be found at Appendix C or whatever it might be.
We decided to ban the away fans because they had a conversation on the phone.
All I can understand is that two councillors agreed that the away fans shouldn't be in attendance. And so from my understanding of the minutes is that this is pressure that's come from two councillors rather than intelligence that's been provided by the police. So you have here a biased set of minutes that's inaccurate and is giving us a false picture of exactly what went on in those meetings.
I mean, what I'd say is I wasn't at any of the SAG meetings,
The police.
and I think, well, it's an actual, that is fact. I wasn't at the meetings. What I would say in relation to minutes, they're never a verbatim record of what has been said in a meeting. It depends off, a lot of this depends on the skill of the actual person taking the minutes to encapsulate the relevant gist of the conversation and what was taken into account in terms of reaching any conclusion. Obviously, it's the same with council minutes for council meetings. We're obviously aided now by the fact that a lot of meetings, including this one, are actually televised and recorded, so there is an actual verbatim record. And as I understand what was said earlier, if there is a verbatim record of that meeting, it should be made available to the committee, because then you actually have the total record of the meeting. I'd be loath to say that minutes are biased in essence. It may depend on the actual person taking the minutes themselves.
I think you can see the frustration we have because on face value, reading those minutes, it doesn't correlate with other things that we've been told.
I fully accept the frustration of the committee, which has come through in the previous evidence-giving session, and now this. As I say, a minute will never be a totally accurate record of a conversation, which is why I think actually if there is a verbatim record, it should be before the committee.
And that's what's really helpful. In defence of the minute taker, it does record the fact there was no intelligence, and maybe that is the answer. We will find out when we hear the minutes.
Yeah. And I think, go back to the primary purpose here, which you, Councillor Cotton, have set out, the confidence of the Jewish community in Birmingham and the confidence of Jewish people to be in Birmingham, visit Birmingham and enjoy Birmingham is paramount here. And these minutes do not give that. I'm going to move on to Robbie Moore.
Just to stick with the two councillors and following on from Joni Reid's question about conflicts of interest, predetermined decision-making, prejudged views. What's the disciplinary process associated when there's that level of concern that's clearly been made?
Well, the disciplinary process would be, there's a number of methods, and as people will probably know in this committee, the issue of member conduct is being debated, as particularly in relation to the sanctions available in the standards regime in general, and I think the government have been making consultations.
How at Birmingham City Council is the disciplinary process triggered?
Well, I wouldn't class it as a disciplinary process. What I'd say is you have the councillor conduct and a standards regime. So you have the councillor code of conduct, which all councils have, their locally agreed codes of conduct, and then actual individual members are subject to that code, and if they fall short of the code, sanctions can be applied for any breach of the code.
Has that been triggered in relation to these two councillors?
It will only be triggered if there is a written complaint in relation to the specific conduct of members.
So here we are, nationally, concerns being raised. Councillor Cotton, have you raised these concerns and triggered this process?
I have not raised a concern with standards at
Why
this
not?
point. Because I've not been had placed in front of me a complaint of the of
You're,
nature
you're
that triggered
clearly
that.
you're clearly here raising concerns. You've said yourself in this meeting that you've got concerns around the views that were expressed. You acknowledge that you haven't seen tweets, etc., but you've expressed views. Mr. Brooks has also said and raised concerns, but yet this disciplinary process or actions against those two councillors has not been triggered. I don't understand why not, if you're really wanting to protect the reputation of Birmingham City Council.
I would like to reflect, given what I've heard today at this committee and some of the issues that have emerged, on what the appropriate next steps would be. I don't want to prejudge any standards process, but I think it's important that I reflect on what I've heard from the committee here today.
So just going on to community impact assessment issues, what was your assessment of the advice from the SAG on the level of risks to different communities in Birmingham and to the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans? And can you explain why the level of risk changed over the course of time in some cases?
I'm not sure we can, because I don't think that's the process for the SAG. I think the SAG has to accept the risk assessment on the basis of the assessment by the relevant competent partner. It did not. We didn't.
No view on that.
We had a view in the sense that we wanted to know how to respond to it appropriately, and one of the important purposes is to enable the whole range of partners, fire service, traffic, etc., all to coordinate around the event as it is ultimately operationally planned, and that's what we did here.
How did and maybe this is for you, Councillor Cotton, as well, how did the council seek to communicate the decision with of the SAG ultimately with those in the community that were being impacted by the decision?
That would have been via the letter that the chair of the SAG had communicated to Aston Villa in the first instance, wasn't it?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. So so the Aston Villa Football Club is one of the sort of the two prime recipients of the advice of the Safety Advisory Group, the other being the council itself in its licensing function and other statutory functions. But the chair of the SAG wrote after both the 16th of October Safety Advisory Group meeting and the 24th with the outcome to Aston Villa Football Club.
So just written correspondence, no physical engagement or conversations or...
They were in the meeting.
Right.
So Aston Villa Football Club had multiple representatives, qualified professional representatives in the Safety Advisory Group meeting.
And how have you... Obviously there's been quite a lot of damage, community tensions have been raised. How as a council have you sought to reassure the Jewish community within Birmingham beyond the ultimate decision that was made and the months that have passed since?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, there's ongoing engagement with all of our communities, including the Jewish community. As a council, as has been referred to, we adopted the IHRA declaration some years ago. We promote and support Jewish community events. We have, like many other councils do, a Hanukkah celebration, for instance, which I attended in December. We annually commemorate Holocaust Memorial Day, but we also have alongside that the ongoing engagement with local Jewish organisations. There's the work that we're doing around the development of our new anti-Semitism strategy, which I think is really important. And it's important that's aligned with the national strategy as well. And it also builds on the tradition of interfaith working that we've had in this city over many years, something which I think is very, very important in a city as diverse as ours.
Thank you.
Joe White.
Yes, the police earlier reported that they had picked up through different inquiries that there was proposals for people to arm themselves and to attack the Israeli fans should they come to the city of Birmingham. Was that fed up to the highest level of the authority? Because obviously that's a serious safety concern that you as an authority should be monitoring and be working with the police on.
As the political leader of the council, that was not made clear to me. I don't know whether there's anything from an operational point of view that's communicated through.
So in this case, I think it's clear that the police have primary responsibility for public safety and law enforcement in relation to issues such as that. What we do have responsibility for is resilience and emergency planning. So in the event of an attack presenting wider threats, then we would activate our emergency procedures. But that was not this sort of issue.
I've served as a councillor for many years at senior level, and the security of my community is a number one priority. And if any intelligence had come through from any committee, then at a senior level we'd have been working very closely with the police to manage that.
Let me be absolutely clear, if such a thing had been communicated to me, I would have done exactly the same as you would have done when you were a senior councillor as well.
Paul Connor.
Councillor Cotton, your letter tells us that from the SAG meeting on the 24th of October, there's a new assessment starting afresh. Have you looked at the minutes? Do you think that's what happened? Because it looks just like they reconfirmed their previous decision.
Well, I'll refer you back to my earlier answer on this, which is to say that clearly the Safety Advisory Group has to act on the basis of the information and assessment that's placed in front of it. And I think as we've already heard how that process works, and that the Safety Advisory Group can't sort of second guess, particularly when it comes to police intelligence. I have concerns, particularly having heard the interactions here this afternoon around some of the information that was placed in front of that Safety Advisory Group. But I don't think it would be inappropriate for me or anybody else to try and second guess that. But I am concerned, given what I've heard here this afternoon.
But do you see? I know we will get a firmer view once we hear the actual recording. But do you get an impression from the minutes any really serious attempt was made to start afresh, or did they just rubber stamp what they'd already decided?
I mean, not having been a participant in that meeting, and simply based on the minutes, based on the evidence that set out in those minutes, I don't think I'm qualified to say to provide an in-depth commentary on what happened within that meeting. However, it is clear to me from the proceedings that are set out there that information was placed in front of the partners who sat around the Safety Advisory Group table, and that they reached a conclusion based on the intelligence that was placed before them.
The Maccabi fans not taking up the tickets, or the Maccabi club not taking up the tickets, what effect did that have on in the context within Birmingham?
So clearly, the decision not to take the ticket, I think it's important to remember that the Safety Advisory Group doesn't take a decision, it provides advice. And actually, the formal role of the Safety Advisory Group is if advice is not then acted upon, the council then needs to reflect on whether it uses its powers in terms of amending the safety certificates. I think it's important that we need to understand that that's how the process plays out. It is an advisory group rather than a decision making forum. Clearly the decision of Maccabi Tel Aviv not to take tickets somewhat changed the dynamic there, because there was then no decision or advice to be complied with, or decision to be taken. My principal concern, though, was coming back to the overall position at the start, which was to say, look, I do think that if we are saying that we cannot allow away fans of a football team to come into Birmingham and safely participate in a sporting event, and if that's then perceived as being a sense of discrimination or targeting of one community, that is not acceptable. That is not acceptable, and that was my concern right from the outset with the implications of that advice being provided.
We've heard the decision to ban away fans increase the threat to the Muslim community from right-wing extremists. Was this something you discussed with the parties?
So I was incredibly concerned when I learned that was the advice that was going to be provided to the Safety Advisory Group, because I think a lot of what then subsequently unfolded was quite predictable in terms of right-wing extreme actors stepping into that space and using the situation in Birmingham to pursue their own divisive agendas. I think that was predictable, and that was exactly what was in my mind when I expressed the concerns that I did.
And you expressed that danger to people?
Yeah, I was very clear from the outset that this was a likely consequence of what would happen if that decision was to be taken.
Thank you.
Joe White.
Yes, thank you. You said obviously you suddenly had to become very knowledgeable about SAGs and the decision-making process around the Maccabi Tel Aviv match. What police intelligence were you provided with as part of that briefing?
I was given the high-level readout at that meeting on the 9th of October around what had been provided at that point to the Safety Advisory Group, and also the day before I received a message from the Chief Constable conveying that that would be the recommendation they're putting forward based on concerns over what had happened in Holland.
So it's the Dutch experience, not the threat.
There was in the message that was sent to me by the chief. It was based on based on concerns around what had happened in Holland. That they were the recommendation would be to the Safety Advisory Group not to invite the away fans, and then I subsequently responded by saying, whilst I am not going to get involved in your operational detail, would be wrong for me to do so, I do think that that is a wrong decision for the city because of the message it sends out about Birmingham.
So the police did not inform you of the potential threat to Israeli fans by armed groups?
I was not told anything around armed groups or anything of that nature, and if I had been, if anybody had mentioned the prospect of armed groups, I obviously would have responded quite vociferously, because I think something of that nature is clearly a massive concern that needs to be addressed.
Councillor Cotton, I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked the policing minister and also the Deputy Mayor for Policing at the last session that we had. You've raised a huge level of concern around the amount of intelligence that was given to the SAG, the advice that was given to the SAG for the decision to be made, predominantly by West Midlands Police, the damage that ultimately this decision has cost your city and its reputation as being a welcoming city. Do you have confidence in the Chief Constable of West Midlands Police?
I mean, it's ultimately it's not for me to take decisions on those matters. That is a matter for the Police and Crime Commissioner. What I will say is, particularly having heard the discussions here this afternoon, I do have concerns around the quality of material that was provided and the provenance of material that was provided to the Safety Advisory Group. That group can only work on the basis, as I said earlier, of candour and confidence in the material that's placed before it. And I think, you know, I have serious questions that I would like to see addressed as a result of this inquiry.
Does it concern you that we've had to bring before us the Chief Constable in front of this committee not once but twice, and have to get the Chief Constable to say to us that he's going to have to come back to us with even more information to provide clarity on questions that can't be answered?
I think it's very important that we have absolute clarity over what happened in the timeline of events leading up to the Maccabi Tel Aviv Villa match. I think, you know, it's right and proper that you are holding to account in that way. I ultimately come back to the point that the reflection that this puts upon my city, a city that I'm very proud to call home, that is an absolute paragon when it comes to diversity of its communities. This reflects poorly on Birmingham, and this is something that I want to see addressed, because I have to tell you, as a proud Brummie, it is a place that includes all communities. It is a place that's full of vibrancy and life. That's the Birmingham I want to be talking about. I don't really want to be in front of a committee this afternoon talking about issues that detract from the impression of Birmingham, but I think it's right and proper that there is clarity around what happened and that people have the answers that they need.
West Midlands MP, I will concur that we absolutely, no, I'm not West Midlands Police area, but I'm a West Midlands MP, and I would concur that we do need a strong and vibrant Birmingham where everybody feels safe. Thank you so much for your responses to our questions. There are clearly a number of matters for the committee to consider, and we will stay behind now to consider some further points and what our next steps will be. But I'm incredibly grateful for you both attending and also being prepared to stay later than your allocated time. Thank you so much. Order.